Sorry, just a minute. Yeah, from the start. Yeah. Okay, is that kira-kira jelas juga?
Yes.
Jelas,
Great. Okay.
So I see that Pa Hendrawan Supratikno is also joining. Are you there, Hendrawan? Well, he said he would be in Jogja today. He's online.
Yeah.
I don't see him yet.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wait. I'm looking at the watch. It's on my watch. Let me look again.
Nice to see you all, Henry.
Hey, Hendrawan. Hey.
Hello.
Lagi mana?
From on the way from Jogja to Salatiga.
Okay, traveling from Jogja to Salatiga. Okay,
selamat siang Pak Hendrawan. Sudah lama tidak ketemu. Sudah lama sekali tidak ketemu, tapi rupanya Anda masih muda.
I'm aging, sudah menua.
Saya sudah tua sekali.
In case you're in Jakarta, please contact me.
Tentu saja Pak, terima kasih. Dan sama juga kalau Anda ke arah selatan.
Baik. Terima kasih.
Okay, I'm looking at my watch. It's 2 minutes past 2 di Jakarta dan di Salatiga. Pasti ada yang masih akan bergabung, tapi sudahlah kita mulai. Selamat datang pada webinar keempat yang diadakan dalam rangka Dies Natalis UKSW Universitas Kristen Satya Wacana yang ke-65. Hari ini pembicara adalah Profesor Hal Hill. Hari ini tidak pakai topi seperti di foto di poster. There's no hat like you had in the poster. Sorry. I hope you like
hebat sekali ya. Itu memang kreativitas Indonesia yang bagus sekali. Nomor 1 di dunia.
We tried to look for another picture, but this one was the one with the best resolution.
Paling baik itu. Yeah,
okay. Before we kick off, I would like to ask Pak Mardimin untuk memimpin doa. Silakan Pak.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Henry. Ladies and gentlemen, let's open this webinar with a prayer. I will lead prayer Christianly. And for my brothers and sisters of other religions and beliefs, I ask for you to support a prayer according to your religion and belief. Let's pray together.
Thank you.
God in heaven, thank you for your blessing and gift, so that this afternoon we can together in this spiritual space to talk about the future of Indonesia after the COVID-19 pandemic. Bless Professor Heril, who will facilitate this webinar so that he can give us enlightenment. Lord, we leave the course of this webinar from beginning till end in your hand. In the name of Jesus, we pray and give thanks. Amen.
Amin.
Terima kasih Pak Mardimin. Berarti sebetulnya diskusi hari ini, presentasi hari ini adalah lanjutan dari presentasi minggu yang lalu dari Pak Sudarno. Pak Sudarno juga membahas dampaknya COVID terhadap perekonomian. Namun Pak Sudarno minggu yang lalu terutama melihat dari aspek kemiskinan. Pak Hel hari ini akan lebih melihat itu dari segi ekonomi makro dan ekonomi kebijakan. Seperti semua webinar yang diadakan dalam rangka Dies ke-65, webinar ini hanya akan berlangsung selama 1 jam, singkat, padat, dan to the point. Diharapkan adalah Pak Hill akan bicara selama 20-25 menit, dan that will be a challenge. There's 26 slides, but we see. And kalau ada yang nanti mau bertanya, bisa 2 cara, bisa raise hand atau bisa melalui chat. Bagi yang berminat dapat sertifikat, nanti kami akan tunjukkan daftar hadiah. Anda bisa registrasi, terus sertifikat akan dikirim. Baik, without much further ado, Pak Hel, silakan.
Terima kasih banyak Henry dan Pak Mardimin, dan terima kasih banyak atas undangannya. Saya senang sekali ada kesempatan bicara dengan kawan-kawan Salatiga, walaupun itu virtual, tapi lebih baik daripada tidak ada. Memang saya beberapa kali ke kota Salatiga, kota yang sangat indah. Salah satu paling indah di Republik Indonesia saya kira. Dan senang juga dengan presentasi dan webinar bersama dengan Universitas Kristen Satyawacana yang punya nama di dunia pendidikan tinggi dan punya nama dunia penelitian yang penting sekali dengan misi dan visi yang penting. Kesan saya khusus untuk Indonesia bagian timur, tapi bukan saja Indonesia bagian timur, tapi nasional. Boleh saya juga tambah secara singkat bahwa saya ada kesempatan pertama kali ke Universitas Kristen Satyawacana lebih dari 45 tahun yang lalu. 45 tahun yang lalu, itu zaman itu Pak Willy Tuasuta dia rektor dan Pak Lik Wilaja dia pembantu rektor dan Pak John Ihelau dia kepala pusat penelitian. Pada saat itu saya diberi tugas sebagai dosen muda. Kasihan sekali saya tidak bisa datang oleh karena itu sedikit sulit dapat izin kerja di Indonesia. Tapi sejak itu saya pernah ke Salatiga mungkin 2 kali. Satu kali saya ingat ada international conference yang diadakan oleh Ibu Konta Dominic almarhum sama Henry juga dan kawan-kawan. Saya senang sekali ada kesempatan bergaul dengan Satyawacana sekali lagi. Okey, maka untuk presentasi hari ini boleh dikatakan memang setelah Dano, it's incomparable. Dano is an amazing man and a great friend of mine. This seminar, mungkin saya akan pakai bahasa Inggris kebanyakan, tapi mungkin diskusi bisa campur. So this presentation, I'm looking forward after COVID has finished, mudah-mudahan tahun depan, and thinking what are some of the big development policy issues which Indonesia is going to face after the COVID. So Henry, please stop me if the time is running out. As you said, mungkin terlalu banyak slide, ya. So silakan mengganggu ya kalau saya waktunya habis. So this is my talk, kira-kira brief introduction, context, global and local. I want to advance 3 general propositions, and then I want to discuss the way forward, thoughts on a possible reform agenda. So topik yang luas sekali, waktunya terbatas. So I'm just going to try and highlight what I think are some of the big development policy issues for Indonesia after the pandemic is controlled. Ada lagu lama boleh dikata, and boleh dikata juga ada lagu baru. So I'm going to try and talk about the issues in this context. And so the main part is section 3 of the presentation, thoughts on a reform agenda. Henry juga, kalau ada tanya jawab sambil bicara, do you want me to? I'm happy to stop if you like.
I will occasionally stop and then
because in my screen I can't properly see the chat function.
No,
so
I will alert.
Okay, terima kasih. So just brief introduction. So hampir 2 tahun sejak COVID pandemic mulai, and the outlook is really uncertain. The outlook globally and the outlook for Indonesia. The COVID crisis is unique in global and Indonesian history. There hasn't been anything like it globally since Spanish flu 100 years ago. And there hasn't been a global economic recession in peacetime for 90 years. So this is really new territory. And for Indonesia, arguably, it ranks as a serious crisis, one of the most serious crises in Indonesian history, different from, but in some ways comparable to, Pertengahan tahun 60-an, then Krismon Asia tahun 90-an. So it's a very serious event for Indonesia and, of course, for the world. The context is that the global economic and political environment is volatile and potentially dangerous. That's partly because the global architecture is not delivering equitably for the whole world. There's a growing divide globally between rich and poor countries. It's possible we are going to see an economic convergence with the developing countries much more seriously affected by COVID than the richer countries, and therefore a convergence, the convergence which was evident for much of the last 20 years globally between rich and poor countries convergence, maybe is coming to an end, except for China, which is a special case. It's a very unequal crisis, and we can see that from looking at the fiscal stimulus measures in rich and poor countries. The rich countries have had the capacity to support their citizens and their enterprises and their society much more than the poor countries. You can see from that figure that the advanced economies have spent many times more than the middle and low income countries. Indonesia is, of course, middle income country. And so whereas Indonesia had a fiscal stimulus last year of about 6% of GDP, for rich countries, it was often more than 20%. At the other extreme, the low income countries, predominantly in Africa, have only been able to do very small fiscal stimulus. So a very unequal crisis. It's also a very unequal crisis, we know, because it's been what some people have called a two-track pandemic, and that's because the vaccination rates have been highly uneven between rich and poor countries. So whereas the rich countries are now in many cases almost fully vaccinated, contoh saja Australia 95% untuk penduduk yang umur 12 tahun ke atas. For poor countries, the vaccination rates have been much, much lower. So there's extreme fiscal inequality globally and extreme vaccination inequality. So the world's in a very dangerous situation, I think. In addition, the world is in a dangerous position because a lot of the global institutions have not been working adequately to protect the interests, especially of poorer countries. This is especially so if the two global economic superpowers, China and America, are unable to reach an agreement. So that's the context, just to emphasize the general context in which I think we have to look at Indonesia and other countries. Okay, second part briefly on my presentation, I want to advance three general propositions for thinking about the pandemic. And how to resolve issues in a post-pandemic world. First of all, we're in a world of what some people have called radical uncertainty. There's a great book on that just recently by two eminent British economists. The radical uncertainty applies to the state of international financial markets, to the pandemic, of course, which no one foresaw exactly, for climate emergencies, and for many other unanticipated events. So first point, we have to think in terms of radical uncertainty. Second point, if countries want to recover after the pandemic, they need to have a reset in their economic and development policies. I use the word reset because a great book on that has recently been written by a good friend of mine in Australia. Some of you may know Ross Garnaut has written a book called Reset for Australia. And I think it applies, the analytical framework applies for many countries. So returning to business as usual is not feasible or desirable. It's not feasible because many countries, including Indonesia, have rising public debt, so their fiscal space is limited. It's not feasible because global inequalities, both between and within countries, are serious, and we want to avoid a return to what might be called Trumpism, not just in America, but whether it's in Brazil or Philippines or anywhere else. And it's not desirable for Indonesia because its economic performance, while in some ways quite good since the Asian financial crisis, is arguably below potential. A third general proposition is that crises create challenges, but also opportunities. A lot of research has been done on this topic, which tells us that often governments undertake more radical reform only after crises because they are forced to have a reform. And we see that in Indonesia's history, I think, that some of the really big and successful economic policy reforms have been after serious crises. Think of the mid to late 1960s, the mid 1980s, and after the Asian financial crisis. So crises create opportunities as well as challenges. I won't talk about the COVID impacts across countries. These are just illustrative numbers as of September this year. Just to make a couple of quick points. First of all, Indonesia's crisis was serious. Its health crisis was very serious. Its economic crisis was, you might call, moderately serious. It actually came through the crisis with less severe economic decline than most of its comparator countries. GDP declining last year by 2%, whereas, for example, the Philippines experienced -9%, India -7%. So the crisis for Indonesia was serious, but not as serious as other countries. The health indicators suggest Indonesia's crisis was, however, as serious as many others. Okay, so that's the context, just to give you trying to indicate where my thinking is coming from. Now let me move to the main part of the paper on looking forward. What are some of the reform options for Indonesia going forward? So I've got 7 topics. I'll go through them very quickly. And silakan Henry, kalau saya harus stop, just let me know. Maybe give me 5 minutes warning if you can.
Sure.
So these are elements of a reform agenda. Some of them, kebanyakan boleh dikata lagu lama, but lagu lama dengan lagu baru juga. So what the policymakers, I guess, what do they have to think about? This is a tentative suggestions of issues. So clearly, governance institutions, topic yang luas sekali, everything is on the agenda, on the table. We know Indonesia's government effectiveness indicators are about where it is in terms of the country's per capita income in ranking, evidence that it's in some respects improved dalam era democracy, sejak era Suharto, but still a lot of challenges, clearly, which I'm sure our audience knows much more about than I do, but the big reform agenda, the bureaucracy, the legal system, central local governments, more checks on independent government, etc. And of course, no quick fixes, but there's a big agenda for institutional reform, clearly. Second, the macroeconomic policy framework. I think this has been a major success story in the democratic era for Indonesia. In fact, Indonesia has not had a macroeconomic crisis during the pandemic, unlike many other countries. And it hasn't had a crisis in part because Indonesia has been a competent macroeconomic manager during the democratic era. And of course, for a lot of the Suharto era too. And it's what economists look for, things called vulnerability indicators. And the vulnerability indicators sort of predicted this, that Indonesia's macro management was probably going to help the country during the crisis. So here are some of the indicators which we look at to try and understand whether a crisis will be serious or not. I think we haven't got time to discuss it, but you can trust me, I'm an economist. So, but conventional indicators did tell us that Indonesia had a good chance of surviving the crisis, the pandemic, without a macro crisis, and that's more or less what happened. So arguably, as the economy recovers, the macro policy framework before the pandemic will still be a very robust framework for after the pandemic. By the way, a lot of discussion on this topic. Again, it's a very big topic. Some people advocate a thing called modern monetary theory. I'm not persuaded by that. We can discuss it in the Q&A if you like. However, Good macro is a necessary but not sufficient condition. A good macro management doesn't help with the health management issues which arose in the pandemic. This is very nicely illustrated by two of my friends in the Philippines, two top economists from the University of the Philippines, Toby Monsod and Karina Gochoco Bautista, in which they made that very point for the Philippines. Philippines has had a much more serious pandemic than Indonesia, even though its macro management has been quite good. So lots of challenges thinking about the macroeconomic reform agenda going forward. And I just mentioned a few briefly. Clearly, Indonesia's tax effort is way too low. The government has very limited fiscal space. The government can't meet a lot of the demands of the community with a tax to GDP ratio of just 11%. So there has to be pretty radical tax reform for the government to be able to do the kinds of things which are necessary in the post-reform agenda, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, we know a lot about what needs to be done. One of the best papers recently on this is, in fact, by Mantan Menteri Keuangan Hatip Basri and colleagues. Very proud to say a former PhD student of mine. They've got a very nice paper some of you have seen in the American Economic Review on how to increase the tax effort. Another issue which is important is domestic resource mobilization. Here we have, in a sense, the paradox that Indonesia has quite a high savings rate, but it still relies quite heavily on short-term foreign money to finance its fiscal and current account deficits. And as we know, in an era of global capital volatility, that's a risky strategy. And so I think that's going to be a second core part of the macro reform agenda, to ensure that Indonesia is less vulnerable to these sudden capital reversals, which can really create problems for a country's management. Okay, so that's the macro agenda. Again, just discussing very briefly. A third agenda item is, I believe, is the importance of staying open. We have a lot of evidence to show that more open economies generally grow faster than more closed economies. Jagdish Bhagwati's book on this topic, The Defense of Globalization, still one of the best. However, globalization is a potentially dangerous force unless it is well managed, a point which Joe Stiglitz has made many times. Just as an illustration on staying open, I focus on a couple of quick points. One is that Indonesia has been missing out on a lot of export opportunities, which would have created a lot of employment opportunities for the skills base of Indonesia's labour force, the medium skill base for Indonesia. And I give an illustration of this, just one among many, and that is to say, we know that the fastest growing part of global trade, merchandise trade, is what's called global production networks. These are production networks where many goods are produced, across many factories in many countries, with the high-tech stuff going into high-wage countries, the lower-tech stuff going into middle-income economies, and the assembly often in China. So to illustrate this, Indonesia's market share in a lot of these big global production networks is actually low. It's too low, I think, for a country of its size. So the biggest part is electronics. You can see that Indonesia's share has actually been declining this century. It's a long way behind Malaysia and Thailand. It's also, importantly, a long way behind Vietnam. Vietnam, of course, was a late starter, but it's reformed very quickly and it's created a lot of jobs. And that is, I think, one reason why Vietnam's poverty rate has fallen much faster than Indonesia's, because of the employment being created by these global production networks. So you can see the figures in this table for different products, but the story is fairly similar. Indonesia has been missing out in important respects. So why has it been missing out? Well, partly it's because Indonesia has always had an ambivalent attitude towards foreign investment. And that's important because foreign investors as buyers or producers are critical to the way international trade is being organized. Suka atal tidak, mau atal tidak. The foreign factor is really important. And as my colleagues at ANU, Andres Suryanta and Arianto Batunra have pointed out, Indonesia needs to reposition itself in the global value chain. So I refer to a working paper they've written, and one of the illustrations is to look at this table and just to show that Indonesia, for example, tends to have still a rather restrictive policy towards foreign investment. The last column in that table is a thing called the FDI Restrictiveness Index developed by the OECD. The higher the number, the more restrictive is the regime. And Indonesia's pretty high. And that's, I think, a barrier. It's not the only barrier, but it's a barrier to participation in these global production networks. By the way, big topic of trade policy. I'm not going to go into all the details, but clearly in the wake of the pandemic, there's going to have to be a change in trade policy. I would argue staying open, but also being selectively and strategically engaged in import substitution where you're convinced you won't be able to trust international market supplies. And the obvious cases here, I think, are in medical equipment and pharmaceuticals. Clearly, I think it's going to be in Indonesia's interest to develop this sort of pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity to a much stronger extent. But I think the key thing is that shouldn't be seen as a carte blanche for protectionism in general. Now, Henry, I see a couple of chats. Oh, that's just from you. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyway, Hal, let's have a short break now.
Okay.
I see that in the meantime, the number of participants has increased to 150. So there's quite a lot who are attending. Okay. May I invite Pak Malkan, who is from the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. And I'm pretty sure you have questions. Before we go to the way forward, mungkin sebelumnya, can I invite Malkan to, whether you have any suggestions, comments on the presentation so far. Silakan Pak Malkan.
Thank you very much, Henry. I prefer at this point to be all ears. I'm just would like to listen and then see at the end probably.
Okay,
thank you very much for the offer. Anyway.
Thank you. Pak Hendrawan, are you with us? He's traveling in a car, so he may not catch this. Okay, if not, then let's continue and we continue the session later.
Baik, okay, Henry. So then kepada Pak Malcolm, saya juga mau all ears. I'd like to hear what everyone is thinking later. So looking forward to your comments.
Thank you so much. No, thank you.
Terima kasih. So moving forward then, Henry, I'm getting towards the end of my time, so I'm just keeping an eye on it. So the agenda going forward, item number 4, I think is important, is accelerating the digital economy. So this was, of course, a trend which was occurring before the crisis, and the pandemic has accelerated the transition to a digital economy. It's also exposed, I think, a dangerous digital divide between those who can work from home, schooling from home, even health from home, shop from home, and those who cannot. So I think that's going to be a really important reform agenda going forward, is how to achieve broad and equitable internet access for the whole community. In some ways, analogous to having universal access to primary and secondary education, or universal access to public infrastructure like roads and so on. So, and here we see that Indonesia has, of course, made a lot of progress in the internet, in the digital era, but it still ranks not very high on efficiency and cost indicators. You can see some comparative indicators on fixed broadband, mobile broadband, just as indicative indicators, and that's telling us that the digital divide in Indonesia is still quite a serious problem, as well as the efficiency and cost of it. Question is, the question is how to achieve this goal. And that's, again, a big topic which I haven't got time to discuss. It's the first step, I guess, is going to be ensuring a competitive market for internet provision. That is, a lot of players in the market to keep prices competitive. But also having some equity objectives included, which may involve explicit subsidies or so-called community service obligations to households and communities and regions which otherwise might be missing out just by a market-driven solution. It's possible to have a national public infrastructure broadband. I'm not convinced it's necessary, but if it's clear the market won't work equitably and efficiently, that's always a last resort. And of course, Indonesia has done that in the past with Palapa. And of course, it's doing very well with unicorns at the moment. But clearly, the digital divide has increased inequality in Indonesia during the pandemic. Possibly, I didn't hear Pat Dano's presentation last week, but possibly Pat Dano talked about this as well. Okay, so number 5, obviously, is investing in and reforming the health system. So the key point here is the pandemic has reminded us that societies are only as strong as their weakest link. You can have a very high quality private health system, but if it excludes large numbers of the community, you're not going to have a healthy community and a healthy society. So we know the pandemic has adversely impacted on the poor, not just Indonesia, but everywhere. It's particularly relevant for Indonesia because its public health system has tended to be underfunded. It's, of course, decentralized, sejak tahun 2001, and arguably also the medical education system needs to be strengthened. So again, we just get some approximate indicators from looking at these health indicators. So of course, we know Indonesia's health indicators have improved a lot in the last 50 years. Average life expectancy has gone up by 15 to 20 years. But Indonesia spends very little on health, relatively. In fact, a good deal less than its neighbours, even including poor neighbours like Vietnam. And the so-called out-of-pocket expenditure, that is what is not covered by medical insurance, even if you're in a scheme, is still pretty high. My impression is that during the pandemic, we know last year, of course, with the previous Minister of Health, there were some quite serious problems. With the new minister, I understand things are working better, but there's still some issues, I think. I think for the poor, a lot of the poor are still unprotected. The costs of getting vaccination and testing, I think, are still quite high for the poor. So I think that's a really big issue, building a strong public health system. I might just mention that last month's Indonesia Update, the conference we hold here every year at the ANU, had an excellent set of presentations on public health issues organised by Dr. Furaman and Dr. Ririn. So I highly recommend you looking at that for ideas on public health policy. The website is there for anyone interested. Okay, so that's the health system. The education system clearly is a major challenge. And again, the pandemic has highlighted both the strengths and the challenges of Indonesia's education system. So we know the broad story, I think, that Indonesia's quantitative indicators have improved a lot over the last 50 years. Literacy's fallen a lot, literacy's risen rapidly, enrollments have risen rapidly, and it performs moderately well, only moderately well on gender equity. But we know also that the system performs not nearly as well with regard to socioeconomic equity. We know the dropout rates by socioeconomic class vary a lot. We know that the quality of education across socioeconomic class varies a lot. And we know that many schools don't have access to internet. And so when schools are shut down, the kids from the poorer families without internet access have missed out on a year's education, maybe or more. A lot of the work, I think, in this field, I've been influenced by the work of Dr. Daniel Suryadharma and colleagues, formerly at SMERU, now at the ADB Institute. And sort of central question is why Indonesia, with its 20% budget mandate for education, isn't getting more value for its expenditure. Of course, I'm talking to people who are involved in Indonesia's education system, so I'm sure the audience knows much more about it than I do. Just to illustrate some of the quantitative impacts, some recent World Bank research showed that for Latin America, the so-called scarring effects of lost schooling could amount to lifetime loss of earnings of about $24,000. That is, kids miss out on education, they permanently enter at a lower rung on the employment market, and it's a permanent loss. And so this again is a loss for Indonesia, and it's an unequalizing factor. Okay, so final area is social protection. So here, of course, Pat Dano would have given you the story here, so I can't really add anything to what I'm sure he said very comprehensively. So my take as an outsider is that Indonesia's made a lot of progress with its social protection policies over the last 20 years, especially with programs like PKH, which are conditional cash transfers. It's possible also that maybe one of the reasons why reported poverty didn't increase much during the COVID last year and this year is because the program PKH and Line really were quite effective in targeting the poor. I know that's the argument. Some of you may have seen the presentation recently of Dr. Asep Suryahadi of SMERU, who is writing the latest Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies Survey. And I think that's Pak Asep's argument. And and I guess he's the expert in the field with Pak Dano, so that's very encouraging developments. Of course, we don't really know what the poverty figures, whether they're the same robust quality from Susenas this year and last year, because it's very difficult for field enumerators to get accurate data. But my sense is going back to the old policies mix of the government probably makes sense, but my guess is that the program would have to be expanded, and the targeting, the database issues and so on probably have to be strengthened. So, but I'm sure Pat Dano talked about this in great detail. So that's the main points of my argument. Just to mention a couple of more things briefly, we had a conversation a couple of months ago with two of Indonesia's greatest citizens, Professor Mari Pangestu and Professor Tiki Pangestu, a famous sister-brother combination on COVID, both the health aspects and the economic aspects, and I highly recommend that if you want to follow up on some of the issues. And the final point is, while we're thinking about COVID, let's not forget some of the existential crises which are going on around the world, and let's hope that the Glasgow summit can produce some meaningful results. Baik, Henry, terima kasih banyak, and very much looking forward to comments and discussion. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much, Hal. I also would like to welcome 3 other speakers in our series who are joining today, and both from London, Sudarno, who is now in Semarang, I guess, and Ibu Heidi Dales, who is in Australia. Welcome, and great that you can.
Oh well, welcome, Juga. I didn't know Pat Dano was listening, so Pat Dano, I defer to you on everything. And to Anne, hi Anne, it's pagi di London, yeah, but hi, thanks for tuning in.
Okay, there is a question from surprise, Hendrawan Supratikno. Hendrawan, you sent your question by chat, but if you are online, I think it's better if you can ask it directly. Hendrawan, silakan if you're there. It's always the big challenge when you do Zoom meetings. You don't know exactly. So let's wait whether we can get Ibu Happy, who's doing a PhD on price stabilization of basic goods in Papua. Ibu Happy, are you with us now? Silakan pakai bahasa Indonesia saja kalau mau bertanya. Ibu happy? Are you there, Ibu happy? Yeah, she is leaving a car at the moment, so she just sent me a message. Okay, siapa? Who can I give the floor?
Can I ask?
Please, silakan. You can kick off.
Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you, Professor Hill. One thing that I don't see from the presentation is the recognition that Indonesia is an archipelagic country, which is different than you compare to the growth of industry, say in Malaysia, in Thailand. So they are just land. So supply chains is very easy. So we are not comparing apple to apple. But in my country, Henry was here also. We were together. Oh yeah, by the way, I just would like to correct something, Henry. I used to support Menko Perekonomian, but it was until 2 years ago. I was there. Without the recognition of us archipelagic country, so the supply chain cost is very expensive. Here we have multimodal and everything. Even until now, we haven't solved that problem. And second is the relation between central and local government related to investment, which is very low FDI. We know very well that how regulations here, if you want to invest, one of the biggest problems lately, the government has tried to fix it by establishing what we call the SWF, Sovereign Wealth Fund. And one of the difference between the previous programs is that this program will ensure that the potential investor will not have to face about problem in the regulation either in local government or in central government. That's probably one main item. And then I agree also with you on the public service, particularly in education. In Indonesia, I grew up like that. We have very minimal education based on competence. I graduated from Maryland University back in the States. I started the first 2 years in what we call community college in there. It was financed by local government. And it was very cheap because you contribute also to the local taxes. That kind of school we need to really promote here because of course we have I don't know how many percent young people, but without proper education, they will become a burden. Not to mention about the health and everything. I guess that's all my question or comments. Thank you very much, Professor Hill.
Thank you, Pak Malcolm. If I'm not mistaken, you're now with the Ministry of Fisheries too, yeah, like Pak Edi, correct?
I'm supporting it because that's why I always believe that if you want to improve this country, I came back in '97, and I told the government, hey, we are in the middle income trap. No changes. Because if you go to try to invest in you like it or not, that project is built on the local property, local government property. So we have to build from there, electricity, competence school. Indonesia, we don't have the blueprint for electricity for industrial sector. We do have the roadmap for electricity for housing, 450 kilowatt. but not proper industry.
Okay, thank you, Pak Marco. If I may add before Hal replies, I mean, we are also doing an activity on understanding the impact of the COVID crisis on SME exports in Indonesia. And there's one very interesting and worrying development is the impact of the high container prices due to the repositioning of containers throughout the world. And for example, if you send a container of furniture from Jakarta to Rotterdam in Holland, it used to be about $2,000 for one container. At this moment, it's $16,000. And which means that the value of the transport costs are higher than the value of the container, which means an incredible increase of prices. And buyers in Europe are now saying, look, suddenly we cannot charge higher prices to the consumers anymore. So we're slightly afraid that in the year to come, export of SMEs may have an issue. Okay, thank you.
So, Henry, do you want me to respond or
yeah, please.
Oh, okay. So well, Pak Malcolm, terima kasih banyak. Very interesting comments. And tentu saja itu benar, Pak, sebagai katakan Pak Malcolm, bahwa Indonesia negara kepulauan yang terbesar di dunia. And so you have these special challenges, both logistics and also regional inequality between the isolated regions. If I look, kalau saya periksa vaccine rates, presentasi yang terima vaksin antara Jakarta, Bali dan yang lain perbedaan luar biasa besar. Yes, you're right, of course, Pat Malcolm. On infrastructure in general, well, Pat Henry is actually the expert, Henry, so I think you're much better qualified. You've been working on infrastructure and logistics for many years. So Pat Henry, I'm sure you could talk about it much better than I can. Of course, Indonesia has a challenge ongoing, and we can see that from the high costs of ongkos transport antara pulau agak tinggi. On the sovereign wealth fund, that's interesting. I don't know enough about it to be able to comment. Kecuali saya ada sedikit ragu in the sense that sovereign wealth funds are normally set up for countries which have an anticipated future liability or which have a current resource boom which is not going to last for long. So you want to save now for a future time when you need the money. So one example is when you have a commodity boom, you want to save some of it for the future, like most of the Middle Eastern countries have sovereign wealth funds. Norway has a huge sovereign wealth fund. Or you want to be like, say, Singapore, also Australia, actually, and you've got, ada hutang besar sekali dari pensiun pegawai negeri. So you need to save for it. So those two reasons I understand. For Indonesia, it seems to me neither of those factors are really as relevant. So I'm not clear about the sovereign wealth fund. Why not have general investment reform, di bawah BKPM? Do you really need another factor, that is this sovereign wealth fund? I think I want to see the results, I guess. And if sovereign wealth fund can work more efficiently for the reasons Pat Malcolm mentioned, why not open it up to all investors and not just the sovereign wealth fund investments? A final point just to mention is I've been reading recently the experience of Malaysia, a thing called the 1MDB. And I guess the pengalaman Malaysia ada lesson dari itu, that be very careful because they can potentially be a vehicle untuk KKN. So I'm open to it. I can see a case for, but I'm just a little bit skeptical, I guess, if I may say so. On the education issue, yeah, I'm sure, but Malcolm, I can't really add anything to that. I think it's a crucial point. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
And Henry, you might like to comment on the transport logistics costs because you know this topic really well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the recent developments which is very interesting is the merging of the companies, state-owned enterprises that operate the ports. There used to be 4 separate identities, each operating about 15 to 20 ports. And recently they have merged. And one of the key issues why they have merged is that the government, the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprise, hopes that it will reduce the cost of inter-island shipping. And there's a study going on soon in which I will be involved, which is to estimate the impact of this merger on transport, logistics costs. In the meantime, we have questions from our friend in Semarang, Pak Sudarno. And there's also a question from, I think it's Pak Hatip. Dia bertanya apakah boleh pakai Inggris atau bahasa, ya dua-duanya boleh dipakai, Pak. Mungkin Sudarno, if you're with us, silakan.
Oh yeah, yes, I'm with you. Selamat sore, Pak Holil.
Oh, selamat siang, Pak Dano. It's very nice to see you.
Very nice to see you. You look great, and thanks a lot for your excellent presentation and for your generous and kind comment. We have been friends for many, many years, and you inspire a lot of us. We met in Satya Wacana 20 years ago with Henry, with the late Ibu Konta. And again, I like your talk a lot, and I enjoy very much. And the 7 points that you mentioned are right on the money. These are exactly the things that we have been working on. As you know, that I'm also working in the government with Pak Sua, with Ibu Sri Mulyani, with the Vice President right now on the social policy especially, but also working on the health and also on the macroeconomic policy a bit. So, but my question is actually very simple, Professor Holhel. During my talk last week, I conjectured that the likelihood of having a K-shaped recovery is most likely. I think it's been confirmed by a colleague from the Mandiri Research Institute. And this is a bit worrisome in terms of, rising inequality in the future because of this accelerating digital economy. And as you know that there's a gap of the middle class and above and below when it comes to the digital economy and where the economy going back. So I like the radical, the reset that Ross Garnot mentioned is critically important, but there is a problem when we are talking about reset in Indonesia because it takes probably 5 or 10 years to reset our economy in terms of, bringing in the new wave of digital economy. So what is your take about this future recovery of Indonesia, Professor? Thank you very much. Good to see you again. I appreciate it.
Oh, Pak Dano, senang sekali dengar Pak Dano, dan apalagi to see you. It's great to see you looking very well. And it's always a pleasure to sort of listen to what you're saying. And Pak Dano, maaf ya, saya belum ikut presentasi Anda minggu lalu, but I'm hoping it's on the web. And so
yes, sir. Don't worry.
Oh, great. Itu prioritas tinggi untuk buat saya besok. I want to listen to it. I know I will learn from it because you've been studying the system PKH dan lain-lain so closely, and I think it's a story which is relevant not just for Indonesia but globally, because Indonesia has been a really important laboratory, and the great work that you and your colleagues at SMERU and TNP Duaka have done, I think, have been really path-breaking. So terima kasih banyak, and that's my tugas pertama besok, is to listen to your presentation. On K-shaped recovery, Pak Dano, so saya tidak punya crystal ball, otherwise I'd be on Wall Street. Actually, I wouldn't be on Wall Street, sangat membosankan. But look, it's really hard to tell. I think it's clear that the recovery depends on controlling the pandemic. And as long as the vaccination rates are pretty low still, and if herd immunity is a very dangerous solution, my impression is it's going to take quite some time for the recovery to occur. I mean, the good news, I guess, is that the major economies are doing very big fiscal stimulus packages, US, China earlier, Japan, Europe. So I guess the global economy is going to probably be quite strong this year and maybe into next year. But then the global economy is also very uncertain. So we don't know when the US Fed is going to start, normalizing monetary policy and increasing interest rates. Is there going to be a taper tantrum seperti yang terjadi tahun 2013 when, banyak modal lari dari Indonesia oleh karena Ben Bernanke tiba-tiba naik tingkat bunga di Amerika. So I think there are a lot of unknowns, or to use Kay and King's radical uncertainty, a lot of unknown unknowns. On the other side, at least the Indonesia's public debt is very manageable, because you have Ibu Sri Mulyani and Pak Peri managing the economy. You couldn't get better managers, and the public debt, I guess, is going to rise maybe to sampai 40-45%, so pretty low actually. So that's a good news story. Commodity prices are still pretty good. And so that's a positive for Indonesia. My impression, and you guys know the story, but my impression is Indonesia's political and social fabric is still okay. You know, I mean, you know, the democratic system functioning still effectively, unlike Krisma in Asia, when, you know, there was a political and an economic problem. So I think in that sense, I'm sort of cautiously optimistic, but it's not going to be the kind of V-shaped recovery that we saw, you know, for example, from the Asian financial crisis. I think the K-shape, unfortunately, is a kind of indicator. But we know that every forecast economists make are wrong, right? So we don't really know, but I guess I'm cautiously optimistic for a gradual recovery. And of course, the other thing is we don't know whether there's going to be another Delta variant or another pandemic wave, you know, which, given the vaccination rates for Indonesia are still fairly low, you know, Indonesia is vulnerable, I guess. I don't know. What do you think, Patano? Are you cautiously optimistic, or are you a bit more pessimistic?
I'm cautiously optimistic, Pak, because, you know, the health ministry is also a good friend of us, and he's very open to ideas, and we have been trying very, very hard to expedite this vaccination. But I agree with you. We have to remain cautious on this one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak. I think that's great.
Terima kasih, Pak. And as I said, I'll listen to you tomorrow. Is it on the web? I guess if I look at Satya website, do I find it
I'll
there?
send you the link. That's
Don't worry,
terima kasih.
Henry will send you something.
Terima kasih. Look forward to it.
Good to see you.
And look forward to you visiting Canberra again soon, Pak Tano.
Yes, sir. Yes. Looking forward to seeing you. Stay well, Pak. Salam buat
Yes.
kawan-kawan ya.
Yes,
Thank you.
sehat terus ya, Pak. Terima kasih.
Yes, sir. Terima kasih, Bapak.
Yeah. And I guess the next governor of Indonesia, saya dengar, akan berasal dari Jawa Tengah, Semarang juga, yeah. So I'm expecting you will be the key advisor in Pascal Jokowi.
Okay.
Yeah, I should be serious, but inshallah.
Satya Wacana Faculty Economy has at least two persons in high positions, yeah, like Pak Sudano and Pak Hendrawan, although the positions are very comparable.
Right. Yes.
The university, small faculty of economics, but it's doing well.
Yeah.
We have some minutes left. I have not heard any of our master's and PhD students yet. I know it's always difficult via Zoom.
Henry, ada orang Timur juga ini.
Hai, lulusan dari Satya Wacana in Delhi, Joao, please.
Halo.
Selamat
sore.
Sore.
Good afternoon, Pak Henry, and also Pak Hal.
Selamat sore. Maaf, ini siapa?
Joao
Saldanya.
Oh, Joao Saldanya.
You didn't know that I'm in the Zoom.
No, I didn't. Oh, senang sekali ketemu dengan Joao. Apa kabar?
Baik-baik. I'm happy that you are very healthy now. Yeah,
boleh dikata masih hidup saja. Sudah lama sekali sejak kita.
Sudah lama. Yeah, I've been going to Canberra at one point.
Yeah, I hope you will come. Mudah-mudahan sebentar lagi Joao akan datang. Apa kabar di sana?
Di sini baik-baik. The things are going well. Tapi Pak Sande waktu he was inviting me, I said, maybe could be interesting if Pak Hal Hill could also touch on some issues of Timor Island, West Timor, Eastern Indonesia, Timor-Leste. So within the COVID, we just got a release of a study by UNDP doing a study of 23,000 households 2 years in a row. Yes, we are affected. Socio-economically are affected. Economy contracted by 8.5%.
Oh, but
last year.
Itu gawat, yeah? Serious.
Yeah, 8.5. So it's quite big. So oleh karena itu, will be nice to hear something from a Canberra perspective on Timor Island, Eastern Indonesia, and of course the big picture.
Actually, untuk perspektif itu, Zhao, saya mau tanya kepada Anda. Yeah, I mean, you know much more about the situation than I do. So I'd like to hear your main impressions. Tapi saya tidak tahu bahwa ekonomi tahun lalu minus 8%. That's very severe, yeah?
Minus 8.5.
Minus 8.5, yeah?
Last year.
And bagaimana mengenai COVID?
COVID is currently is under control. We get dozens of deaths. Infected, Delta juga ada. Tapi kami masih di state of emergency. Not a lockdown, like in most likely in Melbourne, Canberra, but
yes.
Still,
then vaccination rates sekarang berapa persen?
Its first shot is about 70%. Second shot, 40%.
Oh, so that's relatively quite good, yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty good. The size is small anyway, so the population is small. And,
I'm not going to intervene, but let me introduce João for those of you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Know him.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Harry, for taking up the time.
João adalah lulusan Fakultas Ekonomi UKSW. Kalau tidak salah, lulus akhir tahun 80-an, betul?
Muridnya Pak Henry lah, ya.
Ya, murid saya lah itu. Waktu saya dulu mengajar di Salatiga, João ada di dalam kelas saya, dan muridnya cukup nakal, tapi oke lah. Silakan, João.
Oh, thanks. But I would like to hear more about Pak Hal punya perspective, and of course you. Tapi sebelum itu, I just get a call from Pak Willy. He's in Kupang.
Okay.
He say,
you mean Pak Willy Toisuta?
Yeah, Pak Willy. Say greetings to Pak Hal, Pak Henry, and all alumni in this meeting.
Oh, tolong sampaikan salam dari saya.
Yeah, will do.
Yeah, I've lost contact with him. Yeah.
No, I'll still start. I will let him know.
Yeah. So at least, João, dari perspektif Timor Leste, I guess one good thing is harga minyak cukup tinggi, so that should be helping your fiscal position a bit, I guess, huh?
At least from the budget side, we're able to cover ourselves. It could be for the next 10 years or so, because of the petroleum fund. So, but during the crisis, the pandemic, it's also pretty good. Our international friends also helping. So all the vaccinations are fully financed by international donors, which is a step forward.
Yep.
For us, it's quite good. Except that we have political instability, not sorted out yet, but the government is still in place. We did some constitutional problems, but hopefully we're going to have elections next year for president and the year after for parliament. I just got back from inland early November, and things are remaining quite almost the same. Yeah, still depressed with the pandemic. Movements are not quite. Economy has not been a lot in 20 years' time. Jadi, we have so much work to do here.
Let me, I'm conscious of the time.
Yes.
We can just continue no brawl, but our webinar started at 2 and we aim at concluding more or less at 3 o'clock. But don't worry, those who want to stay online, please stay online. Jadi sayangnya Pak Hendrawan Supratekno juga mau tanya mengenai tax and K-curve, but I don't think he is online again. So if he is, please Hendrawan, this is the opportunity. If not, then I'm think I will close this webinar.
Yeah.
Terima kasih banyak Anda telah berpartisipasi. Thank you Pak Helhil. Thank you for our questions. It was, maaf ya, tapi hari ini seperti lebih sebagai reuni daripada sebagai webinar. But okay, that's also fun. Dan saja wacana sedang merayakan TIAS ke-65, berarti ya adalah pentingnya adalah reuni juga. I would like to inform all of you. Saya ingin memberitahu bahwa webinar berikutnya adalah hari Senin yang akan datang, juga jam 2 WIB, dengan pembicara Pak Profesor Syarif Hidayat dari LIPI, yang akan mendiskusikan hubungan Indonesia, relasi Indonesia antara pemerintah dan sektor bisnis. Agak mirip studi Andrew McIntyre dulu ya. Baik, sekian dulu. Saya lihat ke fungsi chat sebentar, tidak ada pertanyaan. Ya ada beberapa yang juga ngomong, ini lebih kayak ini, tapi ya memang begitulah. Dan FIFA UKSW, dan sampai webinar berikutnya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak Henry, dan kepada peserta-peserta terima kasih banyak, dan majulah UKSW.
Thank you.
Yeah. Terima kasih banyak dan sampai jumpa ya.
Terima kasih Pak Hel.
Good to see you, Pak Hel.
Great to see you all. It's really nice.
Hi Johan, he is our friend Pak.
Bagaimana Pak?
Johan is also our partner in crime also.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you studied together with Joe Darno atau enggak ya? Atau sebelumnya?
No, I'm his senior.
Okay.
But
Okay.
Ini yang pasti apa nih?
Sudarno.
Mas Darno, apa kabar?
I'm good, bro.
Good to hear.
I'm
Good to
good.
hear you're still healthy.
Yeah, I am. Good to see you, Pak Hall and Joe.
Yeah. Great
Stay
to
well,
see you.
Thank you
Papa.
very much.
And
Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Bodhikata Xiao dan saya juga partners in crime, ya. Dengan buku
Yep,
yang mungkin 20 tahun yang lalu, Xiao.
It's 20 years. It's time. It's time for us
Barangkali
to revise it.
barangkali perlu edisi kedua.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll
Okay.
be in touch, Pak Hal.
Bagaimana, Pak?
I'll be in touch.
Great. Look forward to being in contact with you again. Dan sekali lagi terima kasih banyak atas kesempatan, and really enjoyed seeing you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hohil. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I will have another meeting with you next time. Bye, Joe.
Mudah-mudahan. Yeah, look forward to it.
Inshallah, Pak. Inshallah.
Oh, yeah. Bye.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
I will have another American Economic Review paper coming, bro. Oh, sir.
Oh, luar biasa, Pak Darno. I don't know how
Thank you,
do it.
Papa. Thank you, Papa.
Barangkali
This
Pak
is-
Darno-
Itu ada Pak Darno itu. I want to, yes.
Pak Darno punya otak luar biasa besar.
No, Pak, because you inspire me. I was telling the truth.
Oh, saya
The
mungkin
truth and only
hambatan,
truth.
saya mungkin hambatan saja.
No.
Oh, but
You are still my guru. All the mantra on the 7 points.
How-
Right on the money. We are
sama
working
juga
on it, sir.
Hal has a lot of
mentor saya
students
juga.
across East Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Pacific. You know.
Oh, well, I think
Okay.
Bodhikata.
I'll let you go. Pak, and stay well, ya, Pak, ya.
Stay well, yeah,
Pak.
yes, yep.
Okay.
Sehat selalu,
Okay.
all my
Okay.
friends. Sampai jumpa,
Love
ya.
you, bro. Love you, sir. Bye-bye. I have to go to
Saya
another
juga.
meeting.
Darno.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Hi.
Henry, can I have a minute?
Siap, me? Why don't you phone me in a minute? And,
Okay, I just would like to suggest for the
yeah.
next
Oh, please. What's that?
topic, probably.
No, you can do. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you like to suggest?
You know that one of the issue that mentioned by Pak from the Eastern Indonesia, you know that to export their goods, they have to bring their goods to either Surabaya or Jakarta, exported abroad. So the supply chain issue, one of our biggest problem in this country is, we can produce our own ship or container, particularly the ship. But we have not, Indonesia have not signed International Convention of Arrest of Ship. That is why the bank cannot. It hampers them from giving credit to finance the building of the ship, because
shipbuilding is rather. There's a lot of shipbuilding going Surabaya, PT Pal.
Oh yeah, PT Pal. I went to that, but the problem is no banks will fund it. Why? Because if I borrow the money from the bank to build the ship, and that ship, for instance, I have problems with my other counterpart, and they can seize the ship.
Okay.
Maybe we can address that, because that's one of the biggest issues in this country.
Why don't you give me a call later then?
Sure. We'll discuss it.
Gimana Pak Madimin? Maaf ya, kali ini lebih seperti reuni ya ternyata.
Oh ya. Oh, bagus juga.
Tapi ya,
tidak membosankan.
Memang menarik ya, ada Pak Hendrawan, Pak Sudarno, mereka dulu ya kakak adik kelas.
Yep.
Dan juga jauh yang sekarang di Delhi.
Ya, saya masih agak ingat, Jo.
Oh ya, aku ya, universitas sendiri di Delhi. How's your university going, Jo?
Sorry?
How's the university?
Going actually well. Student population is still because we're English. Full English. They have to do a foundation program for 1 year, do general studies, on math, English, Portuguese because of obvious reason.
And all your lectures
But
are
I'm having students going for exchange to North Central College in Illinois next semester. Doing economics there, so it just giving us more spirit to move forward. It's a challenge, but it's a good. It's worth it to pursue.
Yeah. Your lecturers orang Timor semua atau ada orang luar negeri juga? Your staff is from Timor Leste only, or foreign staff?
A number we have. Initially, we have a combination of internationals, and then now people who come back from US, from Australia, from Philippines, Timorese. And we have to pick. It's not easy to get, but we're building up, slowly building up the team.
But do you have a link with Satya Watyana or not? Not yet.
Not formally, because I'm still also building the campus. Jadi masih tempatnya seperti yang dulu. We're functioning there. We have about 140 students so far in language and economics and business, and then also foundation and general studies. So as soon as we already get the appropriate campus, which hopefully sometime early next year, then I will start inviting all my network to be part of the.
Good.
At least kasih wejangan lah. Kasih wejangan advice. So how do we move and integrate ourselves into top universities around the globe, including, of course, at the Wajana.
Yeah. So at this moment, how many universities in Delhi? 2 universities?
We have a bunch. Higher education and institutes and university combined, about 18.
Yeah.
The biggest one is National University.
Okay, good. I remember that when I came to Delhi, I was on that ship, on the boat in the harbor. Yes, that was a hotel and boat. And then you met me, brought me to your house. Yeah, it was in 2003, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Hal also, when Hal came in first, also same thing.
Also on
the boat.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
But I saw some pictures recently taken by Jose Godinho. Yeah.
Yes.
It showed, wow, Delhi is so big now. Yeah, so advanced compared to 20 years ago. Yeah.
No, it's city is coming up quite good now. We have shopping center. In fact, I'm doing this from a shopping center that I'm having a coffee here.
Yeah.
While if you look around, this is what you look at Delhi now. This is residence.
Yeah, but you just sent me a picture that you met Pachananaya today.
Oh yeah. That was at the DIT at another unit at I think Pawil was there.
Is he still okay?
He's still very healthy. And then yesterday I was in this launching of UNDP studies, where one of the alumni, Satya Wachana, is the Minister of Finance and with the Prime Minister. Rui Gomez, if you...
Oh yes, I know him. Yeah.
Yeah.
He used to visit my friend in Jalan Patimura in Salatiga.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's going moving slowly up. We're heading into a direction. It's quite slow, but lots of challenges. But I'm quite optimistic.
Good. So Rui Gomez is now minister for what? For
say it again.
Rui Gomez is now minister
of finance.
Is finance minister, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's also lulusan OKSW, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he did theology and language there.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. So your prime minister is also lulusan OKSW?
Say it again.
Your PM, your prime minister, is also from OKSW?
No. Oh, former. He came in very briefly.
Oh,
he was short. I think it was 2 years. Shanana wanted to do something, so gave him the position.
Okay.
At that time. So, but we're doing okay. Satya Wachana is doing okay. Here in Timor. We got the foreign prime minister from Satya Wachana.
Yeah.
Minister of finance now is from Satya Wachana.
Wow.
We can say a bunch. Former public works, former vice ministers, a bunch of them. So
yeah, good.
When Salatiga people comes, it's not a strange land.
Yeah. I see the hand is raised of Pa atau Ibu Awai. Oh no, that was so Rajao, I'm just curious. What about international flights to Delhi? Can you fly from Delhi to where at the moment in the COVID era?
It's quite a challenge because it's only periodic. Weekly only. Most of the time going to KL.
KL?
Kuala Lumpur. So AirAsia and CityLink.
Yeah.
But CityLink does it from Delhi to Kuala Lumpur.
Okay, once a week, yeah?
Huh?
Once a week, one time.
It's a weekly, but it's not certain.
Okay, uncertain.
So you have to get permission for a different flight.
And to Jakarta, no flights at the moment? To Bali or Jakarta, no flights?
No direct. At times that going to Surabaya once after a while. But people who get out from Delhi go to KL and then also go to Darwin. Darwin is a bit more regular. Qantas came in from Queens, from Kenya, not Queens, from Brisbane. It was some time ago. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. I'm going to have to leave the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Joao, and stay in touch, ya.
Thank you.
Pak Yoga, do you all know them?
Stay healthy.
Thank you everybody. Thank you Henry.
Saya ajak teman-teman mahasiswa untuk ikut seminar Pak Henry.
Ya, makasih.
Topiknya berkenaan dengan makro, jadi saya minta ikut tadi.
Baik, bagus ya.
Ya. Sehat-sehat Pak Hendri, sampai ketemu lagi.
Sampai ketemu ya, mungkin Senin yang lagi ya, Mbak Bena. Terima kasih.
Sampai ketemu. Thank you.
Sampai ketemu, hati-hati.
Oh, señora CEO. Beijo.
You cannot just like push the thing out to the side, you don't improve laws, regulations, etc.
Lentai itu one. Depois sai da time. Lei da pona ba resulta contrato. Karena kita mau contract enforcement. Depois pona ba lei pona ba insolvency.
Capacidade de preparação do setor financeiro.
Yeah. Tauro, we go. Ekonomi berapa kerja?
the Ministry of Finance economista board tidak, yang ada seda na liquidez, seda na capital. Two things that different. Liquidez definição seda, capital definição seda.
No, somebody is telling about the real balance sheet. We can, I know it. Real balance sheet.
I don't know what the DNCTL is doing. Someone is somewhere.
Maksudnya mihatit mah ama kuliah.
Patrimony study or Latin for DNCTL is doing.
You supposed to be a shareholder.
You should ask. All the director said that, hey, what are you guys doing? They said that.
I think. No, I think at one point you need to make an appointment with say.
Dia kata investor, você anunciaram né, cara, o presidente da dia, how da dia, se ela dia troca, mas capital tem que estar, o banco não vai ruim. Então se, lá vem a reba fez. A reba banco,
I think probably if he says that, my suggestion would be, ini ala appointment.
about that. Depois o outro ele sebenarnya lolosnya function shootnya board misalnya, usul itu misalnya ada usul pada satu hal lewat atau gitu. Mereka harus oh ini kata sana dia ini aku buat ekonomi labo ini. Nah, kabar sih boleh berbarang aja nih. Itu maksimal. Nah, silo itu kan. Silo apa sih ini orang kuliah kan? Kan saya baru serius deh. But I mean, you are doing a job, keep moving along. Yeah. Nah, saat saya harus mata. Agora penerapan hal sebelum para sebenarnya dan teknologi precisa capital for the sake of atau automatic se va a contar para economia durante la hora de la posibilidad para que